All in favor? Motion's carried. And we're moving right into 7A, which is bylaws, the 2018 tax rate bylaw.
Your Worship, I'll bring forward that the 2018 tax rate bylaw number 2223 be adopted.
Motion by Councillor Nixon, seconded by Councillor English. Discussion. Councillor Nixon.
Your Worship, there's been a lot of work gone into our budget this year by staff with the help of a consultant that our CEO had connections with that was really helpful to the city. And with all that's going on in the province right now, with all these communities dealing with flooding, it's a real pleasure that this year we can say that we're leaving the city very resilient. And it says right in our plans that the city must be able to continue to deliver ongoing programs and services that residents and citizens expect. The city must also have the capacity to respond in emergency situations in order to protect us citizens, businesses, and assets. And I think our plan this year really is doing that with the 15-year plan, and makes us a resilient mountain city. Revelstoke won a Gold Risk Award this year from the Municipal Insurance Association of BC. So I think really proud of the work that staff has done this year and brought forward to council. And council's done a lot of work around the table.
Thank you. Any comments from council? I would like to take the opportunity to echo what Councillor Nixon said and thank staff, all the staff for their part. Our special consultant that we brought in, I think, has brought a new way of looking at municipal finance, and I never thought, being in my 19th year sitting at this table, that I would say that it's actually quite interesting to be going through the city budget process. And but I also would like to give special thanks to Councillor Nixon, who has headed up the finance department more on the behalf of council, takes a strong lead in that, and really looks at a lot of the things and brings that information to this table. So I rely on council, Councillor Nixon, but I also again really commend the staff and our consultant for the great job they do. Thank you. Any other comments or questions? All those in favor of the motion? Motion's carried. Thank you. Economic development, we're BC Transit. Let's go.
For your worship, this is the BC Transit contract that comes out every year. It's the annual operating agreement, and we are required to sign it like the transit for another year. There's not any changes in the transit service agreement as it is from last year. There is a slight increase in the amount that we are being charged for the agreement, just based on increases in wages and increases in general operating budget. But overall, it's approximately the same agreement as last year.
Your Worship, I move that the annual operating agreement with BC Transit and then operating agreement for 2018-2019.
Motion by Councillor Lando, second. Okay,
What did you say before that?
If we could increase ridership, that's a good thing to keep them going through town.
well, I think that what people look at is that they see a bus going by, and there's like people on it, and that may be just a snapshot in that particular moment, but I know that there's a lot of people that rely on the service. It's their only transportation. It's an important service, and even though a high percentage of the community doesn't use the transit, there are a percentage of the community that uses it quite a bit, and I don't think that in this day and age that we can be living without a transit system. But I think that it's incumbent on all of us, and BC Transit included, on ways to be more efficient, get more people that are using the system, and be respectful of the taxpayers, whether it's provincial tax dollars or it's municipal tax dollars that are being spent. But I can't see this system is going to stay here until we have a better system in place. So, like I said, I'm always intrigued by how we can make the system better, and I would never discount any option without really looking at it and thinking about it. But regardless, here's where we are right now with this agreement, and I'm encouraging council to vote in favor of it. And again, every opportunity that we get to look at the system and look at ways to make things better than we probably. Councilor Lambert.
Yeah, just one of the things that I would like to point out is that, it's basically 50-50 cost sharing, and they take the care over 50% for it, so, it's not entirely on taxpayers, it is outside funding that supports it, and I agree with the mayor, we have changing environment now with transportation and options that people have. One of the comments that I often get is, how come it can't just take me right to work or be a streamlined service? But part of the design is to provide a service to people who, as was mentioned, don't have any other alternatives. So the route is a bit more circuitous, goes into the neighborhoods. So for people with disabilities or who aren't comfortable riding a bike or maybe don't have transportation options in the wintertime, for example, it is an essential service for them.
But I think there's, it may be close to 50-50, but there's also the revenue that's generated that comes back to us as well, right? So that, and then we're using other areas of funding like gas tax funding, and I think things like that. So we're trying to minimize the amount of tax collected dollars as much as possible. Other comments or questions about the motion? All those in favor? Motion's carried. Thank you. And Councillor Lando?
I have conflict of interest. Item 9, to a business relationship with some of the parties in the application.
So we are still in economic development. We were talking about the Air Charter Service update, and we are going to have a presentation.
Thank you. Through your worship, today we have Everything Revelstoke, who does business also as Revelstoke Connection, here to present regarding the flight service. This is to accompany the report that you have on air charter services. Is it on? Sorry. Okay. The air charter service report that you have in front of you addresses two primary issues. One, it's an update on last year's service, or the service that we just saw. Everything Rebel presenting on that service. One of the reasons that we're bringing this forward now is to take a look at where that supports the general feeling of what the partners have also come to, which is if this service is to continue, we need to get the service, we need to get the advertisement and the marketing and the program for the service set up earlier. Otherwise, it's very difficult to try and make a go of it if we finish this up in November. So as part of this request is a request that we that Council recommend to have EOF funds designated or allocated for the service. So, thank you.
Your Worship, and thanks for having me today. Just a little bit of history on what Nicole just touched on before we go ahead with our brief presentation here. My name is Bryden Rowe, from Everything Revelstoke, like most know that, and Larry Davis, General Manager of Everything Revelstoke. 2 years, because it's been a 2-year program, well, we've done the flights for 2 years now. The first year we had 15 flights. Last year we took an aggressive approach and had 32. Both of those years, we went to market with the flights in November, which Nicole just briefly touched on. So I just wanted to make sure that was clear. And in going forward, I think that the model has to be, if we're to proceed with it, we talked to Economic Development and the Advisory Committee, that if, in order to have a success, as Nicole touched on, we'd have to go to market much earlier. Obviously, going to market in November doesn't allow you to get to any of the wholesalers that are marketing product for Revelstoke with regard to shuttles and ski tickets and all hotels in February, March. As early as now, and right through to the preseason, much before we were marketing before in November. So that's sort of our position. We'll go through our slides now. So we're just going to go through some of the information on what we've done this year. So again, first day of sales were November 1st. We're going to circle back on some of the numbers around that. Flight service was from January 19th through to March 16th. And you should pay attention to that as well, in that this was the first year that we so we got into doing flights in January. We usually started them from February. There's your days of the week that they operated, and a total again of 32 flights this season. The starting price was $9, and then the variable price model, which we implemented in order to encourage sales, promote sales, was a discounted variable price model that brought some of the pricing down as far from $329 retail. And I'll let Lara touch on some of those details for you, and then feel free to questions.
Perfect. So this is just a brief summary of what the service was. With the service only starting advertising in November 1st, we got 72 days of pre-sale before people arrive in Revelstoke. The entire sale season for the flights was only 132 days. So very short window of sales. So we'll go forward here. So we'll jump into the stats of the season. So 32 flights, of which 18 landed in Revelstoke, 14 diverted. So that brings us to a percentage of 56 arrival, 43 diverted. We all know what January was like this year. We had 9 flights in January, of which 7 diverted, 2 arrived. If we exclude the extreme weather in January, it brings us to a 69% arrival rate, which is roughly where we should be, talking to experts in the field, such as Ed, who works out at the airport. Without the weather, the history of it is usually around a 70% success rate in landing. But we had a very heavy snow year this year, and we were very aggressive with doubling the amount of flight days and doubling the service. So that attributes to why it doesn't perceive as successful, but yet it actually was relatively well done with arrivals and diversions with the weather we had. Another point to keep in mind, out of the 32 days of flights, there were 3 days of extreme weather, which also closed down the highway. So that was a factor in there too, where we had to get other means of transportation to help the guests get in and out of Revelstoke, or even help locals get in and out of Revelstoke.
Yeah, you couldn't even drive here.
So then we're going to go into sales recap. So our total capacity to sell was 690 seats for the entire season. We sold 960 seats. We sold 699 seats, 72% occupancy. A total of passengers was 492. Now, that is meaning that we had, just going to get the right number, we had just over 200 guests buying round-trip tickets. So that's a really good percentage. It's about 30% of guests buying round-trip. This is where most of our guests were coming from. Because of our short booking window, that correlates directly to where you see people are coming from. US, Canada. Most of our marketing efforts were in the Lower Mainland, and we're really centered around those last-minute travelers coming in to the area. If we had a larger booking window, we could really increase that New Zealand, Australia, European market that are already coming here anyways. They're already flying to Kelowna and getting transportation to Revelstoke. If we could increase the booking window to capture their sales now, because that's when that market is purchasing trips to our area, is between May and June. That's when they're all starting to think winter and their next summer. Out of this passenger list, out of the Canada, 90% were BC, which goes back to being really focused in the Lower Mainland. We had 291 Canadian passengers, 262 were of BC, and 110 of which were locals. And a lot of locals bought round trips. So then we go into, there was, just for anecdotal sake, there was 91 passengers from the US. The majority of those were round trip as well. Another interesting thing that we implemented this year was a new booking system, a new software system. And that helped us capture 56% of our sales. It was very easy for users to use. They could just go on, book online, pay online, service done, didn't have to coordinate with anybody. It was just live. And that's something we are going to keep implementing for next year as well if we get approval. Only about 42% came through the office, and then there was about a 2% that used online and the office because they were more locals that would come in, book one flight with us, we'd show them how to book it online, they book their next flight online and so forth. Out of all our passengers that came, we don't have information for about 40 passengers. So we did a really good job this winter of really gathering information of who's coming, where they're coming from, and so forth. So then we go into, this was what our budget was, for a summarized version of what the budget was for this year. 32 flights at 50% occupancy with an average discounting of 20%. You can see it's $126,000 there. Total expenses would have been $241,000, with a profit loss of $108,000. That's worst case. Best case, 100% occupancy, selling at an average of the 20% discounting. We're making a profit there, which then once we make a profit, the partners who support us, they don't have to pay into the program. So the loss is just to help support it. So then we're going to get into the sales recap here. So the actual hard numbers of what actually happened. So $201,000 was our estimated potential income after we included that variable pricing model, which is a lot lower than what we expected with that $329 per seat. But because of the short booking window, we really needed to capture the sales and see that we could get the ridership. We had estimated, this is our total discounting, was $69,000, which is roughly a 34% discounting is what we had. A lot higher than what we had estimated. A lot of the discounting went into our last minute jet lag specials. We were very heavy-handed with them this year because we wanted to get the ridership, get the numbers in there, get people booked and on. 77% of our sales were booked out of our jet lag specials last minute. So going forward, we need a real culture shift to switch the sales going forward. Then we jump into what the total revenue was. So $143,000. Total expenses, $227,000. Now this is pretty variable when you think of diversion. There can be some fluctuation in there by $5,000 to $10,000 depending on if the roads are open, depending on if we land or divert. So that in the future can be a lot less if we have more favorable conditions, if we have more favorable roads and there's not those delays. So total loss this year was $83,000, which was taken care of by our three partners. So the RAA, RMR, and the city each paying $27,000. Average cost per seat to the end consumer worked out to be $325. So each seat that was sold, that was its rough expense. For each passenger, if we break it down further, for the expense is roughly $461. But we did have a lot of passengers do the round trip. here we go. So now let's go into, there we go. So proposal for next year. So we've worked together as a committee, the other partners and ourselves, to come up with 3 options to put forward to everyone. The first one being February 1st to March 15th. And it would be the same service days as this past year. And then we would take out the Sundays through March. Total flights being 23 flight days. Then the next one would be proposal January 18th to March 15th. Same flight days, basically almost the exact same service as last year, but the way the calendar days fall, instead of being 32 flight days, it'd be 29. Then we jump into a much different type of model, which being we capture those after New Year's sales, those long-term people coming to town. We have a lot of families that come into Revelstoke internationally through January and the beginning of February, and they're coming for 7-night, 10-night stays. This model would really capture that after New Year's sales, but the actual flight days through January isn't that high. Then we would throw Sundays back in through March. Total flight days only being 25. So I do have a breakdown of suggested price. We would sell $229 per seat. We would add a 5% GST and a 10% airport improvement fee. The airport improvement fee would be split between the CSRD and YVR. And then we'd need to go to market June 1st. And we've already touched on that a few times about why we need to go to market. We've really in the last 2 years developed this culture of last minute buy, and we haven't created an urgency about capacity, and we need to shift the mindset of the consumer to be purchased due to capacity. There's only a small amount of seats you need to buy now. Instead of, we'll just wait and they'll throw it on sale because they'll have seats left over. We need to flip that to make it successful so we can have less discounting. We need to stay under 20% discounting. Strategies for us for this, for all 3 options, would be to market to wholesale companies across the international market, market to local companies in town that are bringing people in, even market to like our tech sector in town, so that they can let their employees know, or people that they know in the industry who are going to Vancouver, they can set their meetings up around the flight service. We really, like I said, we need to shift that mentality in the guests. So to break down the options further, the first option has 690 seats to sell, and total estimated expenses is $178,000. And then this is the breakdown versus discount and what our profit is. All 3 options broken down. If we can get that discounting lower than 20%, our bottom line will go up, and
then you'll note there, it's just because it's a lot of information for you guys. Last year we were at 73% seats sold or capacity. So, and that's as we've said a few times, that's going to market in November. We feel that 80% is easily achievable by going to market early, and then also you're going to have less discounted periods because people will book before we'll implement discounts. We've had to implement the discounts so aggressively because we're trying to fill seats just before the flights are flying. So in this case, we could perhaps sell a lot of these seats at retail value. Go ahead, Laura.
Yeah, so our second option here would be the full service as we did this year. We would decrease the seats from 960 to 870. More expenses, obviously, because more days flying. The biggest expense to the program is the actual airline itself, and that's the one thing we don't really have a lot of area to influence it, where the rest of it is more weather related. We can work on our service, we can try to push more people to book online, less office hours to book them. There's other variables that can make effective change on this. Then we jump into just the breakdown of the profit and loss. As you can see here with this option, because we have the more flight days, we have a higher profit when we're at 100% capacity. Then we jump into our radical option, the 25 flight days from January 4th to March 15th. It gives us a longer service date. Expenses, it's not too much higher than the first option. Gives us, though, an extra 2 weeks of the service. And there are the final numbers for that one. And that is our presentation. Does anyone have any questions for us?
A couple things that we'll just fill in the blanks a little bit. There's quite a bit of information that you can't really flip through in 3 minutes and say which option would be best, and we haven't decided on the best option. So those are just options we've considered. We've had some discussions and meetings, and that's sort of the 3 options we've come up with. Again, to reiterate, the first year we had 16 flights. We went real aggressive this year with 32. It included January, which was that month of good weather, but poor weather for driving and getting here. That said, as far as the flight being diverted and the high diversion days, there was really no downside for the users. They seemed to not mind the transfers. We would take them to the airport. Everybody seemed, including Freddie Bruschi himself, took the shuttle and got driven to the airport. He said, "This is great, even if you get diverted." So there weren't really any downsides as far as public awareness or lack or bad publicity, I guess. Further to that, as far as flights go generally, just an offshoot of the flights, we did 4 private transfers in year 1 and 15 this year. Is that correct?
14.
14. So the public exposure, the access awareness about Revelstoke is getting out there through the flight service, and again, the private charge went up significantly. So you'd expect to see an increase in that next year, this coming year, I should say, and I would imagine. With the early market again, you get more seats sold. And then I know the question is going to come up, and we'll address that, but I'll let you guys ask about the scheduled service, getting a scheduled service that an airline runs as opposed to the community. But I'll let you guys ask questions if you
A couple questions that I have. So the plane that you're using right now, it's a 18-passenger, but you only sell 15 seats. Is that correct?
It's a Beech 1900. It's 19 seats. We only sell 15 seats
For the luggage.
Right.
for the luggage, for the weight, and it's all a ratio of how much weight versus how much runway. If we had a longer runway and they'd have a longer space, they could fill that plane to 19 seats easily. But they can only carry X amount of weight, and that also includes their fuel. So if they have a full flight of 15, all heavy, tall, big men, lots and lots of luggage, they're not going to have as much fuel, and they have to have a certain ratio for safety parameters. Again, if we had a longer runway, we could easily fill the plane with 19. They could come up with as much fuel as they need, and we'd have no problem. But there's this balancing act that they have to do. In the wintertime, we have pushed capacity past that 15 and have oversold some flights, which is great because that's an extra profit to us that isn't added in there, and it gives us those extra seat sales. But then that's a logistics thing on our end that we actually managed quite well this year. We found a formula that worked about how to deal with people's luggage and expectation for luggage.
So yeah, it's weight. It's just a matter of weight, and sometimes we were able to oversell because you had lighter people, and we just did the math.
If we had more kids flying that day, then we could take an extra 2 adults.
Well, I haven't actually been able to get on a flight yet, but I'm looking forward to it. But I guess my way I would be guaranteed I would get 2 seats, wouldn't I? Is that?
You'd have to buy 2 seats.
I guess what the reason why some people have asked me is it's the right plane for what we're trying to do, and that's why I'm asking the question. And I'm going, what if we went? We looked at the options of going to a smaller plane with less seats, like 12 seats. That would be a higher capacity of being full.
So I've
reducing the cost per hour of having the machine create a higher demand because they know that there's even less seats available? I'm asking the question.
So with our private transfers, our private flights, we have the option of a smaller aircraft not with Pacific Coastal, but with a different airline that we use based out of Calgary. Price difference isn't that much. With their charter cost, it's not that much of a savings to go to a smaller aircraft because it's still the same amount of crew time and the fuel costs. And that is a huge factor when you're thinking it's just the time. It's not a per hour rate or per
We've considered,
plane,
Mark,
but we've considered it.
Yeah, and we can get smaller aircraft. Our brief research on it, which is somewhat brief, but it's fairly informative in that you're better off to be able to have the option to sell more seats because the discount you're going to get for the smaller aircraft, doesn't really weigh out. So,
And majority of the
if at all.
aircraft, and majority of the smaller aircrafts that are on the market are usually around 8 seats. So in the same factor, the weight and the luggage, and in that point, they might not be able to take full capacity because they might not have the cargo space in a smaller aircraft for the luggage.
And we had these discussions with the aircraft that were coming in for our privates, that coming in with a 12-seat capacity. Mm-hmm. And we had 2 on the runway one day talking to both different guys, and they could accommodate, but the price point is virtually the same.
Yeah. And, you look at your different options of these flight dates and these number of flights. I don't know if anybody around the table is qualified to say this is the one to do. We'd probably be looking for direction from you as far as how you perceive the market and where the demand is. And for me, the more flights, the better. But it gets down to the dollars, and you want to obviously maximize, and you want to start reducing the discounting so that you get so the whole service gets to be as close to zero making profit as possible.
And the analysis, you're absolutely right. So what we'll do, and we've already done to some extent, we'll further analyze the days, meaning January, et cetera, and what trips we were light on, and then of course maybe take some of those out, and then make the best informed decision on which schedule to run. And fully appreciate your point. It's not really for you guys to try to pull the information out of that and say let's choose option 2. I think that has to be left up to us and our smaller group to come back and say this is the most efficient, this is the best approach to try to make this a break-even option or even profitable.
I have other questions, but I'm going to go around the table. Any other questions or comments from council? Councillor Sills.
Hey, Your Worship, when we're flying into March, what's your capacity? Because you're talking about there's a couple extra weeks, one option where a couple extra weeks into March. What's your capacity for that time period versus your January? And probably less diversions, but what about?
Yeah, so just historically, just from this past season, March was a really great month to land in Revelstoke. We only had 1 diversion in the month of March out of all our flights. Seat-wise, it was the most heavily discounted month out of all our months. You're losing a lot of that international clientele then, and that's when a lot of our BC ridership from the Lower Mainland, they're already in spring. They're not thinking winter anymore. They're not thinking summer destination. So a lot of the March ridership was more locals, people going back and forth for meetings, and that's where we can really capitalize on advertising locally and getting people down for spring meetings, seeing family through March. So we shift the year for March from international and tourist based to more local and business based.
Just for the group, Lara, what first year, second year, we went right into mid-March for both of those?
Correct.
Okay. So, I don't think we would go beyond mid-March.
There was discussion in our smaller group last time we met about going to the end of March to capitalize on spring break. But it's a hit or miss with tourism spring break. It depends on if you're a family who likes the winter and wants to do that in spring break, or if you're a family that wants to escape and go somewhere hot. So it's a real hit or miss market. So ending it right on the cusp of spring break. Some districts already have spring break right at that second week of March. So you can grab some of those families. But going any further really didn't make sense to the overall group from the tourist perspective.
From the I think the thing that really stands out to us, and we're just so we're just a partner in the mix. We're really we all run the flights. We think it's not a real moneymaker for us at all, to be honest with you. It's a time-consuming project, but we really think it's valuable to the community, and global perspective is a really positive thing. The one thing that really stands out is we're at 73%. Starting selling in November. So we think that, we could be wrong, but we think that you go to market in June, I mean, you should be able to get that other 7% at least, which starts to get you closer to a break-even point. So from the numbers side alone, as far as capacities and such, we're not far off with this thing that we've thrown together 2 years in a row very late. So it's quite successful from that perspective.
And if we can tweak the model, it makes it more attractive for an airline to take on the service. We've had discussions with some airlines about how do we get the service taken over by you. And basically everything we're already doing is everything they would like to see a community do. The Pacific Coastal, for example, will have communities come to them and say, hey, we want an airline service. Can you provide one for our town? And they will tell them, do the legwork, do a chartered service, do something like we're already doing, make a model for it, and then they would take it on. So what the airlines are wanting to see is how viable can it be? Can we make it last long term? Can we extend it into the non-tourist season? From a local's perspective, right after the season ended, we were coming into Easter, and in the office we were fielding a lot of inquiries. Oh, your flight's still running. Your flight's still running. We want to get out of Revelstoke for Easter. We want to go see family. So there is a need for residents to have the service.
And yeah, and for the let's go back to questions. On a scheduled flight service, for those that maybe aren't in those conversations, the group that we work with on this is really wanting that. The group being RMR, Revelstoke Accommodation Association, and you guys as well. They want an airline to pick this up. So just back to that. The Pacific Coastal says a lot of these communities come to them and say, we love to have an airline service, and then they kind of wait for them to do something. So Pacific Coastal, as Lara has just said, is saying not only are you doing the right thing, but a lot of communities don't do what you're doing. So if there's any chance of it, you're going in the right direction. Some of these other communities, there'll be no hope because they're not taking it on.
Which kind of leads up to my next couple of comments that I have is that, I don't have to remind you, but I think it's worthwhile reminding everybody else and the public that may be watching this, that the whole idea for us to get into this thing here was to look at building a business case for a regularly scheduled service. And I think that with a little bit of work, I think that something could be done and should be done, and that's why I'm supportive of this. I know the Economic Development Commission, I attended their meeting last week, and they are recommending that we carry on for at least one more year subsidizing this. My counterpart at the Regional District, Lonnie Parker, and I talked about it. We are supportive of the EOF request of the $90,000. But I guess what I'd like to suggest is challenge you and your company to look at how do we expand on this, how do we get better, how do we get bigger, and I guess a couple of things that I'm thinking of, and I've some of our funding partners on this endeavor, that one is, what about expansion of a regular scheduled bus service to Kelowna Airport through everything Revelstoke? And what about doing some kind of market research on this chartered flight service that goes more all year round, and maybe it's just a Monday, Friday flight in and out, but that would test the market, and we're throwing in $90,000 each as a partner, but we're doing it in the hopes that we get that $90,000 back, and we are getting a good percentage of it back. But if there's other opportunities to go bigger or go home, there's the funding part of it is there. I think it's up to you to start saying, you know what, here's what I think we could be doing. Do some market research, talk to the community, talk to the business community, and see how much support you would get for going bigger, because that's going to be the fastest and easiest way to get somebody like Pacific Coastal to take over the whole schmear, is by showing that there is actually a business case, and it could be all year round, or double or triple the amount of time that we're talking about right now.
And valid points, Mark. And honestly, we've kind of we've gone at it conservatively. In that we don't want to all of a sudden come back and say we've lost X number of dollars because we went. So we have been somewhat conservative with that because it's not our money. It's our time, but it comes down to money a lot of the time. So if I can just make sure I understand the point about the shuttle service, you're saying, because Pete and I talked about this too, Peter from RMR, just about, or it came up in a meeting actually, perhaps expanding the service to Kelowna Airport. Is that what your point was, just having more shuttles? Is that what
Well,
you meant?
I'm saying that I'm challenging you to be looking into it and saying that we think that there's opportunity here and expanding your business case and offering more services and just saying, okay, well, I think there's opportunities, and the only way that we're going to know is by exploring them. And you've got some partners at the table that are putting money in. How do they feel about expanding services? Because let's face it, when we put $90,000 in, and I want to be real clear, we're not talking about direct collected taxpayer dollars. We're talking about economic opportunity funds, which are used to build economic development. And that's exactly what we're talking about here. This is a perfect use of these funds. But I can tell you that when we all around this table say that we're going to commit $90,000 and we get some of it back, that's great. But we're not committing that money thinking that we're going to get it all back, or it's nice, but I'm just saying that there's opportunities for you to look at building a bigger business case and offering more services to the community, the traveling public. But the only way that the community can take advantage of something is that if it's offered to them, and I think that there is a lot of people, regular citizens and businesses, that would take use of expanded services, flights or...
And that's frankly, the discussion's never been had with us over the years. We've kind of gone at this alone, shuttles from day one. So, firstly, appreciate that, and secondly, we'll certainly go away and see and contemplate more opportunities to use those funds to benefit the community. So, thank you.
Councillor Nixon.
Your Worship, you bring up a good point, and one of the 2 months that I hate being on the highway are July and August. So if and that's a really tourism market time for this town. But if I could go to Vancouver and get away for a weekend, that appeals to me, to not have to drive the crazy summer months. Mm-hmm. Because, we all drive in the winter, but I really hate being on that highway in the summer.
It's a heck of a way to get to Vancouver, I'll tell you, if you haven't done it. But I guess we're posing again a conservative approach as far as talking to us. Hey, you're preaching to the choir with us. We would love to expand it. We'd love to have more charters, and the airport terminal is now improved. I don't know if you folks have been down there, so that's really exciting. It's a great airport to use, and going out of the south terminal is fantastic as well. So we're definitely on side for that. And again, thanks for the comments and encouraging us to pursue perhaps other options or further options.
Any other comments around the table? Questions? Okay, all right. Anyways, thank you for the presentation. Laura, nice to see you again.
Yes, nice to meet you.
Yeah.
Thanks, appreciate it.
Bryden, you look after her. She's a sharp girl.
Yeah,
She's gonna make you famous. She's gonna make you famous. You may want to hang around for this next part.
What is the next part? I'm curious.
Looking for a motion.
Worship, I'll bring forward that the Air Charter Service update dated May 4th, 2018 be received for information.
Motion by Councillor Saul, seconded by Councillor English. Discussion. All in favor? Motion's carried.
Part 2, the council recommended the CSRD board that up to $90,000 be allocated from the Economic Opportunity Fund to support the 2019 Air Charter Service with the condition that both the Accommodation Association and West Coast Mountain Partnership continue to provide financial support for the service.
By Saul, seconded by Councillor English. Action on the motion. All those in favor? Motion's carried.
Part 3, that staff be authorized to negotiate a partnership agreement with the Revelstoke Accommodation Association, Revelstoke Mountain Resort Limited Partnership, and the Revelstoke Connection Limited for a 2019 air charter service.
Motion by Councillor Saul, seconded by Councillor English. Discussion on the motion. All those in favor? Motion's carried. Thank you. Motion to terminate meeting. Councillor Nixon, Councillor Saul, all in favor? Motion's carried. Thank you. You guys ready to just jump right in? You need to worry about the break? You're leaving.
He's leaving, we'll let Aaron back in.
Thanks for coming, Trevor.
Sorry I was a little late.
Don't talk.